So I would like to welcome everyone. Uh, I hope everyone kind of grabbed some food and not sleepy because Susan is here to give her an interesting talk full of energy and zeal. Let me give so our next speaker is Susan Armstrong. She is managing partner at Global Training Transformation. Susan is an internationally recognized speaker, award-winning talent development expert, and author. In the last 20 plus years, Susan has delivered workshops in over 45 countries and developed over 500 workshops, which has helped over 250,000 people around the world transform their personal and professional lives. Her leadership program, named as one of the top 5 leadership programs in the world by HR.com. Her topic for today is designing a future proof learning strategy. That's great. That's amazing, Susan. Susan, now I'll give it on to you. Over to
Thank
you.
you.
Please take it over.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It's so nice to see everyone here. So first of all, as the introduction said, don't let the accent fool you. I'm actually not American. I was born and raised in the UK. I currently live in the UK, and I deliver talent development or learning and development to over 45 countries on 6 continents. And so it's a real pleasure to be here today. I've got 30 minutes. And what I want to actually share with you is in my global discussions with my clients, some of the common challenges that we all seem to be facing in what is a very difficult time, and how learning and development can actually help solve those challenges. So I think we've got an enormous opportunity, but it requires using the tools correctly. So this idea of virtual training, virtual conferences, I don't believe is going to go away. Even if everything opened up again tomorrow, I think that organizations have now realized that this is something that works. It can have a huge impact if it's done correctly. So I want to share with you what virtual training can look like and what good training looks like. And then we'll finish by talking about how to develop a strategy that combines all of the elements in learning and development so that if this ever happens again, we're not frozen like we were earlier in the year. So I'm going to have to show PowerPoints. I'd rather just stand here and talk to you, but there are some models that I want to share with you. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. There we go. And as I said, in talking to different clients and working with different clients around the world, there's some common themes that have come up and some very interesting information that has come to light. So one of the biggest challenges that the organizations I work with are facing, and likely you are the same, is now that everybody is working at home, how are we keeping our employees motivated, engaged, connected, not only to each other, but to the organization? So there was an interesting study that actually came out of the East. It came out of Asia Pac that suggested that employees are now looking for second incomes. And even after this is over, that they're still worried that they're going to have employees who now have more than one stream of revenue. So how do we keep them engaged with our organization? The mental health, I don't need to tell you, massive issue right now. So not only is it the social isolation, but it's the issue of now overnight working from home and having to provide schooling, homeschooling in a lot of areas of the world. And then there's the childcare issues. And there doesn't seem to be a separation anymore between work and life. So they kind of all have collapsed together. And so some interesting things are coming out, like people don't know how to manage their time. They're, instead of walking to someone in an office for a 2-minute conversation, it needs time on their calendar. So they're in meetings all day long, and all of this is causing enormous amounts of stress. And then there's the skill issue. So all around the world, we have had managers who have been reluctant to allow employees to work from home. They weren't sure how they were going to going to track performance or how they were going to track objectives and whether or not they were supposed to do or they were doing what they were supposed to do. And overnight, this was forced on us. So there's an enormous amount of upskilling that needs to happen right now for both employees and for leaders. We recently at GTT, Global Training Transformation, we were actually curious because we kept hearing this around the world. So we did a global pandemic generational survey, and the results were quite interesting. And I've got a couple of them on the screen. Leaders are spending, on average, 55% of their day in meetings. So one wonders, how are they getting any work done? Interesting as well with your younger group of employees. So the Gen Zs or Gen Zs, 70% reported feeling stressed. Okay, this is up from 57% pre-pandemic. So this is a rise of 20% of younger employees are feeling more stress. And all groups that were surveyed, all generations said that right now, because there isn't the commute to work and home from work, they're spending a lot more time working, and it's affecting their mental health, their stress levels, and of course then their physical health and their relationship health. So I think the really nice thing is in saying all of this, that in learning and development, we can actually provide the answer to a lot of those challenges. The big problem is that we can't afford to invest anymore in learning that focuses on the what and the why. So learning around the world, I'm so sorry, I have a little frog in my throat. Learning around the world has been primarily focused on content and technical skills. In other words, the what something is and the why something is important. Now, we do, there is a little bit of a focus on the how, where we tell people what they should be doing, but there isn't any focus on the actual application. And as we're going to see, there's a big difference between knowing something and being able to do something. So what we need to do with our learning and development strategies and our learning and development dollars, we need to focus more on the how, on the application of these skills. Not just that they know what they should be doing, but how do they apply this and apply this successfully? So we have to adopt our approach in two ways. We have to adapt our approach in two different ways. First of all, how we provide support and development, and how we prioritize the need and ensure that whatever learning and development strategies we're developing, whatever learning and development we're offering is actually in line with the organization's KPIs, so key performance indicators, and the organization's values. So it has to be in line with where the organization wants to go. So this is how we need to shift. Typically, and I'm so sorry, but I still see this around the world, and it pains me to have to say this, but it's the whole entire reason why we started Global Training Transformation. I still see around the world so-called training sessions or workshops that are actually at the left-hand side of that continuum. They're not a workshop or a training session. They're a presentation. Now, presentations are characterized by it being 80, me, 20, you, the audience. This, what I'm doing right now for 30 minutes, is absolutely a presentation. Okay, it's one way. We're going to have questions and answers at the end, but it's a one-way transfer of knowledge, if you will. At the very other end is something called facilitation, whole separate discipline altogether, governed by a whole separate global body and certified by a separate global body. Training, true development actually happens closer to that facilitation side. So true development is actually a 30, me as the trainer or the workshop leader, 70, the audience. And that means audience interaction, activities, exercises. These days, it has to be relevant to them. It has to be immediately applicable or they don't care. It has to be highly interactive and driven by the participants. and it needs to be really engaging. And the outcomes have to match the business needs. So long gone are the days where we can say, oh, this sounds like a cool topic. Let's get somebody in to talk about this. So how do we go about doing this? Well, as I said to you, there's a big difference in knowledge and learning. So this is called Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm an instructional designer. I have a degree in adult education and instructional design. Bloom's taxonomy then looks at the different levels of learning. So a lot of times in organizations, what we call learning is actually nothing more than a transfer of knowledge, and if we're lucky, comprehension. So they understand why it's important. It's often PowerPoint heavy. It's often content heavy. We need to start to do something that is a little bit more on the workshop side. So we need to really hit that application level. All right. So not only do they know and understand, but they can actually apply it in their everyday jobs. And this goes back to what I just said. It means it needs to be experiential and interactive, because this is where learning occurs. Okay. And there's a big difference between knowing something intellectually and being able to put it into practice. Before we go any further, I just want to clear up some terms, okay? Because, this whole idea of virtual is not new. I've been doing virtual workshops since 2013. I developed my first e-learning program for a client. It was actually Microsoft Xbox, way back in the late 90s. So they're terms that we use. So I want to be really clear when we talk about strategy that there's 3 buckets that we talk about. E-learning. Okay, e-learning these days is somewhat high tech because we've got artificial intelligence that we can build in, and it's getting pretty sophisticated. But nonetheless, it still only hits the knowledge and comprehension. So even through e-learning, all we can do is test that they understand or remember the information that they gain through the e-learning program. So that's not actually learning, it's knowledge. These are really good for product knowledge. When we need to transfer knowledge, e-learning can be great. Online learning, whole different animal altogether. Okay, generally speaking, it's video, so it's static, it's on demand, it's video, it's accompanied by support. We developed an online program where it's a series of videos around creating virtual training, but there's support. There's often support in the terms of a workbook. We've got a worksheet where they can pause the video and actually apply as they go along. And then, there's often coaching sessions that would go along with that to ask questions. So you can accomplish learning through online learning. It's really good for product knowledge. It's really good for hard skills or technical skills. It is not so good for those soft skills where immediate feedback is required. This is where we need virtual learning. Okay, so it doesn't matter what platform we're talking about. If you're not familiar, that is Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WebEx training, not WebEx meeting, WebEx training, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Adobe Connect are some of the best platforms to accomplish virtual learning. So this is where it's live, it's interactive. You can actually do soft skills training. So I have taught coaching, which you wouldn't think you could do virtually, but using breakout rooms and annotation tools and all of the functionality of the platforms, I can actually visit those breakout rooms and provide feedback in real time. So virtual learning achieves that 70-30 that we talked about, all right, where it's 70% participant interaction and it's 30% me as the workshop leader providing feedback, providing the technical knowledge or the instruction. But virtual learning can actually achieve transfer of learning, which the other two, okay, so it's kind of in order of the most powerful, virtual learning being the most powerful of those. So if we look at virtual learning, here's the thing. Years ago, and I've done virtual learning for a long time, it's subject matter experts, and I love subject matter experts, and they do great presentations, but they don't often do good workshops because they stick to that knowledge transfer, that what and that why. So typically, it's been subject matter expert providing instruction. It's been heavily content focused. There's been limited interactivity from the audience. It's information heavy presentations, and think about how many times, and I can certainly tell you in my clients across the board, okay, they have to, whether it's a brand team in a commercial organization or it's the medical directors in a pharmaceutical or in a CRO organization, or it's IT having to transfer knowledge. So procedure, process, what has to be done. And they do it in a 2-hour virtual session that is just, 165 PowerPoint slides laden with information. And then they come to me and they complain and they say, but nobody learned anything. Nobody was paying attention. They're not doing anything differently. Well, no, because all you did was transfer knowledge. It wasn't set up so that they could actually learn what you wanted them to learn. We need to have interactivity for that. Information heavy presentations, you've all sat through them. It's incredibly difficult. A lot of times there's been very low use or inappropriate or, not proper use of the technology. So I can tell you a story about a client, and I'm not going to mention any names, but some years ago, they invested in WebEx to do their virtual sessions, their online training, but they only ever used WebEx meeting. So it was only ever a one-way 2-hour or 3-hour presentation. And the day they came to me some years ago and they said, but we need to do this virtually, budget freezes. We don't have the money to fly people in to do this. Can you do it virtually? I said, sure. I said, but I need WebEx training. And they said, oh, well, we have WebEx, but I said, okay, give me access to your system. Let's see what you've got. Got IT on the line. Sure enough, all those years, they had WebEx training. So we did the session through WebEx training, which allowed breakout groups and annotation and all kinds of fantastic activities. And they came to me and said, how did you do that? So it was, but you've had the technology all along. So we need to learn how to use this technology, effectively for the purposes that we need it for. Training in the past, virtual learning in the past, often it has not supported business needs. So I've got another global client who confessed the other day, they have 44,000 pieces of content on their LMS system, and no one takes advantage of it because it doesn't support the business needs. It doesn't answer the question of what they need right now, and mostly because they're not actually learning anything. They're just watching a presentation. So it's often been a knowledge transfer versus learning. And we have to shift that. Okay, I've been saying this for years. This is not new. But right now, where we're all in the same boat and we can't stop development, learning and development is one of the ways that we keep people engaged. We keep their spirits up. We keep the motivation up. We can't stop developing them. But boy, we've got to shift that. We have to shift it. It needs to be participant driven. It has to be highly interactive. We're finding the sweet spot. Okay, I call it the sweet spot. Years ago when we did virtual learning prior to COVID-19, we could get 4 hours. We could get 4 hours because everybody was in an office. They had nothing else to do anyway. Now we find the sweet spot is 2 hours, 2.5 hours max, because they've got other things to worry about, like homeschooling children or looking after children, or, they've got all those other meetings. Home and work has just come together. So the sweet spot is 2 or 2.5 hours. In learning and development, we call it micro learning. So we chunk the pieces of information. So if I've got a 1-day training program, it now becomes 3 or 4 2.5-hour sessions that are done over the period of a week or 2 weeks. The participants are happy. they're interactive, they get to talk to each other, they get to spend time in breakout groups, the time goes really quickly, and they're more than willing to engage in this. So it really does need to shift. I have always said this, and I'm going to say this now. I would never suggest that we set ourselves up as experts, even if we are. In learning, we need to be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. The sage on the stage is what we do in presentations, which is what I'm doing right now. But I do have 24 years at this and a degree in this. So we call it, being the guide on the side to guide the learning through the activities that we create that allow learning to happen. Learning doesn't often happen from us telling, which is ironic since I'm standing here telling, but it doesn't often happen that way. It happens through actually doing. And it has to be action and behavioral based and highly agile and adaptable to the business needs. And I think this is key when we look at learning and development budgets. We can't not develop, but we have to use our budget very wisely. So how do we go about developing a learning and development strategy that sets us well into the future? Like I said, I do not believe this is going to go away. Okay, I believe that yes, at some point I will be back in a classroom or back in a hotel, with small groups of people doing learning in person. But I believe that will be a reward, if you will, for the participants. It will be something that is a special occasion kind of thing. And I believe that learning will take place through virtual means from here on out, because even organizations and companies that I work with that have resisted it in the past are being forced to do it. I've actually got a global client who has stopped all development right now. It's like they're holding their breath, waiting for in-person to come back. And I don't believe that's the right way to do it. We need to embrace this. Okay, we need to learn these skills. What you need to do, if you're developing a strategy in your organization, it needs to be multifaceted. The very first thing you need to do is you need to figure out the purple circle. You need to figure out where do you want them to be. So go to the senior leaders, go to general managers, the country managers, the directors, and say, okay, what skills do you need these employees or these leaders to have? And how are they doing in those right now? Okay, because you want to find out where you want them to be versus where they are now. This is going to give you what we call the gap. This is a standard performance management, performance consulting gap analysis, and something that's always the very first step in designing any kind of a learning intervention. So you want to do that gap analysis. The gaps in the knowledge, skills, and behavior, okay, are what inform your strategy. Because you might come up with 12, but then you need to prioritize those and line them up in relation to the organization's needs, their values, their metrics, okay, what they're trying to achieve. And that will inform your strategy of where you need to start. Now, I want to point out here, and let's see if I can go back. There are several different ways. All right. Virtual training is not always necessarily the answer, just like in-person training isn't always necessarily the answer. Sometimes an e-learning program works just as well if it's a knowledge transfer or product knowledge. Online learning for product knowledge can work equally as well. So we need to have a multifaceted strategy, but the very first step is doing what we call that gap analysis to identify where the gaps are and where they are versus where you need them to be. And then you prioritize all of those in relation to the business strategies. So the challenges that we're seeing, and of course, there's probably no surprise that I'm doing a lot of these gap analyses with clients right now. And some interesting things, oh my gosh, for learning and development, any of you listening who are in L&D, we have the answer to a lot of the challenges that our organizations are facing right now. It's about how do we develop it. And I'm going to talk about that on my very last slide. I'm just checking our time. But these are some of the top 10 things that globally seem to be the hot button. So motivation and engagement. I have a client who is running 2-hour workshops every single week in the organization on various topics for no other reason than to keep their employees motivated and engaged. It's actually not even development that's at the top of the list. It's motivation and engagement. So we can use virtual workshops to achieve that. Coaching, feedback, and having difficult conversations virtually. When you're used to working in an office, okay, most people are not great at giving feedback as it is, and I could have spent my entire 30 minutes showing you studies on how much we dislike feedback. But we have to do it, particularly now. Coaching now is even more important than ever. Difficult conversations, no one likes to have them. They're hard enough to do in person, and now we have to do it virtually. So there's a huge need around that for leaders. Managing virtual and remote teams. Some leaders are just not comfortable. They don't know how to use the technology to manage their teams virtually. Some of these I've talked about already. The stress management that I referenced earlier, the increase in stress. Some interesting ones that are high up on the list, and I call them old, and they're now relevant and new again. You know, years ago, we used to do time management training or managing multiple priorities. We used to do effective meeting management training. These are actually coming back because with work and life collapsing, people can't figure out how to prioritize and how to manage their time, and we need to help them. And everybody is spending so much time in meetings. A lot of the time, meetings they don't need to be in. Okay, they just don't know how to decline the request or when or if they should decline the request. So effective meeting management is becoming a popular topic. And then, of course, there's logical ones like resilience, adapting to change. I'm even finding a call from the sales world about, okay, now how do we sell in a virtual environment? How do we use technology to sell? And agile emotional intelligence. If there's one thing everyone needs right now, it's a great level of emotional intelligence and the ability to function agilely. So to be agile in the environments. So what do we do? First of all, you've got to make sure that you've got the right technology. The story I told you about my client that had WebEx all along, had no clue how to use it effectively. So make sure you've got the technology that provides you with what you need to deliver good virtual training. And does your L&D team how to know it? You might have to upskill your L&D team so that they know how to use the technology effectively. You have to design your training program. So you may have to redesign some of your workshops and your training so that it is relevant for the technology that you're using and maximizes the functionality. Because again, you want that 70% audience interaction, 30% you guiding those learning interventions. And you've got to think about the content. Some content is better done through e-learning or through online learning versus through virtual learning. You may have to invest in upskilling your instructional design internally. So your learning and development team, you may have to invest in upskilling their instructional design capabilities, or your subject matter experts, teaching them the basics of how to design an online learning intervention. And you've got to create as much excitement for your virtual sessions as you do for other learning options. Because trust me, the feedback that we're getting through virtual workshops, people are saying, wow, you know, I thought this was going to be terrible and it was awesome. I really enjoyed it. You know, I got to talk to my colleagues. I learned, I had fun. So you've got to create that excitement. It really can mirror an in-classroom event if we've got the right technology and we design in the right way. So that was 30 minutes. I want to thank you very much for paying attention. Again, our company is Global Training Transformation. It's what we started this before the pandemic. It is what we specialize in, is helping people to design into or in real life. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to come back on and say thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Susan, for the talk. We really do appreciate and understand the importance of, you know, the right distribution technology for the courseware or,
Yeah,
the platform. Exactly. I mean, the similar challenge that we had when we were, coming from an offline conferencing industry to an online conference. I mean, how to retain all that interactivity, engagement, and
yeah.
networking. So yeah, I mean, with you on that one.
Yeah, it takes thought and strategy to do it. But as we can all see, this is a fantastic platform. I have spoken at quite a few conferences over the last couple of months, and
Mhm.
platforms have not been nearly as great as this one. And it shows the time that you put in to really thinking about, how to achieve the experience you wanted for participants.
Exactly.
And that's what we're talking about in learning and development.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.